Welcome to the morning. I'm thrilled to have again with us 4th District, Massachusetts, Congressman Jake Auchincloss. Welcome, Congressman.
Steve, thanks for having me back on.
A lot of stuff to talk about that's going on in the country, but I want to get right into Los Angeles. You are a veteran, a Marine Corps officer, led Marines in combat in Afghanistan. One of the most storied units in the history of the United States Marine Corps, 2nd Battalion, 7th Regiment, 1st Marine Division, has been taken from their training cycle at 29 Palms, put on buses, sent to Los Angeles with a opaque mission, no ammunition in their rifles, with authority apparently to be able to detain American citizens, people that are on the periphery of protests awaiting law enforcement come then to arrest and to make charges. I just wanted to get your reaction as a Marine officer to the use of the Marine Corps in this capacity. Any thoughts you have for the young Marines that are being sent into Los Angeles, and any perspective as a Marine officer that you would have as a captain or a lieutenant in this circumstance?
Steve, it's not a use of the Marine Corps, it's an abuse of the Marine Corps. It's deeply unfair, not just to the residents of Los Angeles, but also to the Marines themselves. I trained in 29 Palms. 29 Palms is the premier live fire facility for the United States Marine Corps as they train infantry Marines to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. And I know what these young officers and non-commissioned officers are grappling with right now, and I think it's twofold. The first is the sergeants and corporals. The sergeants and corporals are probably in their late 20s, early 30s. These are Marines who have been training for 5 to 10 years as infantry Marines to do close quarters urban combat. And that means that you train fires on a given building, you clear out that building with 3 to 5 Marines, and then you train your fires on the next building until you sequentially basically cordon off an entire section of the city. It's the kind of combat that you do against the People's Liberation Army or the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. It is wholly unfit for service if you're trying to do crowd control in Los Angeles. And so these sergeants and corporals are sitting there and they have to unlearn 10 years worth of tactical and technical training in 4 days worth of time. And they have to really apply their Marines to a set of scenarios and skills that are just really inappropriate. So it's deeply unfair to these sergeants and corporals. I'm also thinking about the lieutenants and captains, and I was a lieutenant when I was in 29 Palms. They take an oath to do 2 things. 1, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and 2, to obey all orders from the President of the United States. What are they supposed to do when the President issues an order that does not support and defend the Constitution? And that's what he has just done by violating posse comitatus. They are put in an impossible situation. It's so unfair for these 25, 26-year-old young Marine officers. And when this judge rules against Donald Trump, as I hope he does, this battalion commander needs to get these Marines back in the barracks immediately.
One of the things that I saw this week that I found to be just jarring and alarming, and I was wondering if you had seen it, which is Donald Trump speaking in front of the 82nd Airborne, Premier Light Infantry of the United States Army. These are paratroopers. They're wearing the maroon beret. And if I'm thinking about the commanding general of the 82nd Airborne Division, Sergeant Major, these guys should be ashamed of themselves. Like, what I saw was total breakdown of discipline, military bearing, good conduct as they devolved into whoops, cheers, oohs and ahs, hoorahs at partisan invective being hurled at them. And that is very disconcerting to see out of paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division. Do you have a reaction to that?
Shameful degradation of good order and discipline, and it is bad for esprit de corps, for the unit. Because for 250 years, the United States Army and Marine Corps and Navy have thought of themselves as insulated from politics and above politics. And it's worth contrasting Donald Trump's Fort Bragg address with the Newburgh Address from George Washington to the Continental Army Officer Corps. And the Newburgh Address is, to me, underappreciated in the scope of American history. basically his officer corps at the end of the Revolution were so frustrated with the Confederation Congress about lack of pay, about lack of logistical support, about, frankly, their incompetence. People hated Congress back then, too, that they asked George Washington to lead a coup against the Confederation Congress. And George Washington stands in front of his officer corps in Newburgh, and he says to them, this is not what we fought for. This is not what we bled and sweat for 7 years over the course of this War of Independence. We are not doing this. We are going to respect civilian authority. And it changed the course of American history, because if he had wanted to be a king, that was the time to seize it. He could have been a king. And you contrast that remarkable statement of American freedom with what Donald Trump did, and it really is, it's enough to make you see clearly the moment that we are in.
I want to talk about the excellent columns that you're writing on your Substack, the Newburgh Address and the Newburgh Agenda,
yes,
that you've talked about and how important that is. But before we get there, I think one aspect of this is that if you take Donald Trump at his word, you take him both literally and seriously, that this moment has been building for some time. They have telegraphed it. They have fetishized it. They've drooled over it. And I don't know what the analogy is. A 14-year-old boy looking for the first kiss, 16-year-old boy first drive in the car with the license. But there is an enthusiasm that's plainly evident on the part of gleamy-eyed sycophants like Kristi Noem, Corey Lewandowski, Tom Homan, Pam Bondi, to employ and use the deadliest military force in the world and to send it into the interior of the country.
yes,
As a demonstration of political power, political force. It's utter politicization. And what do you make of the psychology of that? Because I think by temperament, right? And I don't think I'm judging you wrong. I think that if you're in a position of national responsibility, the last thing you would ever want to do is deploy paratroopers and Marine infantry units into the interior of the country to places like Los Angeles. And I think it's the first thing that these people want to do. How do you explain what we're witnessing?
I think there's two vectors here. One is psychology and one is politics. On the psychology front, Donald Trump clearly has the complex associated with so many authoritarians or would-be authoritarians where they want to surround themselves with fixtures and symbolisms of strength, right? Military and otherwise. I mean, he goes to UFC fights, he deploys the military, he is a sycophant of Vladimir Putin, who is to him the sort of strongman ideal. And so there's a psychology there of Donald Trump, who's clearly somebody who has some issues that he's wrestling with about his childhood and his relationship with his father and how he feels about himself and projecting onto that. That's one element of it. The other element of it is politics, which is the military is the last national institution that has broad bipartisan trust and support. And if you're the MAGA movement, what you're seeing right now is that actually you are certainly ceilinged at about 42%. And if you're Donald Trump, you are not actually sure where the floor is. It could be as low as 25 to 30%, depending on how the economy looks in the next year. You're seeing that the reluctant Trump voters of 24 really don't approve of your handling of tariffs, of your handling of due process as it relates to the use of immigration authorities in deportations. While people still broadly support a deportation agenda, they don't like the visuals they're seeing of people being harassed by ICE agents. So you're seeing your political standing slip on issues that you campaigned on, the economy and immigration. So what do is that you become a political parasite. You try to burrow into the institution that has broad bipartisan support, the military, and you try to use its favorable ratings with the American public to buttress your own. And that's the politics of this. He wants to be seen right now not as the steward of the economy, not as the president in charge of national security. He wants to be seen as the commander in chief because that is where he feels like he can inflate what has been sagging approval ratings. And these Marines, Steve, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, 700 young men and women, did not bleed and sweat for years to be political props for this president.
No, they did not. And it is just appalling. Your Substack, which is growing quickly, and I think it's the best Substack by any member of Congress, House, Senate, and it's a place where the contours of the Democratic Party agenda of the future are starting to be written out in my estimation.
Thank you.
And so the name of the Substack is Simple, Not Easy. And I love that. I've said that to my kids, right? You know, the simplest thing you got to do every morning is just put your feet on the ground and stand up, right? But it's hard to get out of bed, right? It's not easy to get out of bed at 5 in the morning or 5:30. And that's a perfect example of simple, not easy. But you go into, in your Substack, really it's an idea generation Substack about what the agenda of the future has to be. Talked about the necessity for fundamental ethics reform. You've talked about the necessity for there to be a restraint on executive power. And that's what the Newberg agenda is. And you laid it out. And before we get back into what the agenda is you talk about this moment with George Washington. And this is an incredible moment in the career of Washington, who is a tightly controlled man, to say the least. He is emotionally constricted, to use the analysis language of the day. And George Washington is overcome with emotion.
Yes.
Standing in front of his officers. And the revolution is hanging by a thread. What the revolution was called by the people who fought it was the cause, right? The cause. When you have a cause, everyone knew what the cause was. It was freedom. It was independence. People had grievances in the 1770s and the 1780s, just like they do today. And you had somebody who advanced the idea that we can take power, we're strong, we got the guns, and George Washington comes in full of emotion, addresses his officers, and really it's one of the 3 instances where Washington walks away from power that could have been absolute, which is why we have the monument made to him in Washington, D.C., by which these troops will pass during the desecration ahead this weekend. But talk about this idea of restraint of executive power that's going to be necessary as we get into 2028, 2029, and the era beyond Trump, because we have to start imagining it now.
Without doubt. And when George Washington did that, when he walked away from power, no less a person than King George III said, if that's true, then he's the greatest man in the world. And he was the greatest man in the world. James Madison, though, understood that most men are not like that, right? As Abigail Adams said, all men would be tyrants if they could. And James Madison had the brilliant insight that we have to make ambition counteract ambition in this government, because we can't count on George Washington for the next, 250 years of this republic. He was obviously right about that. And so he created these separations of powers and checks and balances. And my argument is that those checks and balances have gone misaligned in the last 50 years. The presidency has consumed too much legislative power. First with war power starting in the 1970s, then with spending powers, then with law enforcement powers. And the Newberg agenda is one way to fix part of that. There's other ways we can talk about tariffs or impoundment, et cetera. But the Newberg agenda specifically focused on the use of the military for law enforcement. And there's 2 laws that really matter here. One is the Posse Comitatus Act from the 1870s that basically says generally the president can't use the military for law enforcement. And there's about 1,000 years of experiences and lessons about why that's a good idea. Because when presidents or any chief executive get to use the military for law enforcement, what do? They tend to bring power unto themselves and use it to create a perpetual martial state. Then there's an exception to the Posse Comitatus Act called the Insurrection Act. And the Insurrection Act basically says, okay, the president can't use the military as cops, but here's some times when he could. And both laws are badly written. They're both too broad, they're too vague. And the problem is it allows someone like Donald Trump to plausibly assert Los Angeles is in rebellion, hence I'm going to activate Marines and declare functionally martial law in Los Angeles. Now, if I were a judge, I would rule against him. I would rule against him under the Posse Comitatus Act. I would rule against him under the 10th Amendment, which basically states that if there's questions about who has the power to do what, the tie goes to the states, and Gavin Newsom is saying he doesn't want this. But even a liberal judge might rule for the president. That means Congress needs to fix these laws. And the most important fix that we can make to this law would basically state, here is exactly when the president can activate the military for domestic law enforcement. Really only two ways, only two reasons. First, an actual insurrection. Think like the Civil War. And the second is if a class of individuals are being systemically deprived of their constitutional rights. Think school desegregation in the South during the Civil Rights era. That's kind of it. Otherwise, you have the National Guard to escalate responses to natural disasters, but there's really no other good reason to ever use the military.
I want to change subjects. An area that you've been particularly focused on in your congressional service is the public health crisis that the country is facing. Scientific research is under assault under the banner of the Robert Kennedy regime at the Health and Human Services Department, vast powers, and his top guy is someone named Calley Means. We talked briefly about him the last time you were on, and a story has just come out about Calley Means. It appeared in Vanity Fair. The Vanity Fair story follows a New York Times profile about Calley Means, and the New York Times profile asserts a biography about Means that is completely concocted. He's a fabulist. It's made up. And I know this because Calley Means was my assistant. And I can account for every day of Calley Means' professional career from 2008 right through this very moment that we're speaking. I know everything he was doing every week of every month of every year, right up through his getting involved in all the MAGA stuff, the Sweat Lodge, him taking shrooms and coming up with the idea that he ought to bring Robert Kennedy and Donald Trump together. So at the end of the day, you have a special government employee in the White House and Robert Kennedy's right-hand guy who has all of these conflicts of interest, who is threatening scientists, bullying, blustering, doing all sorts of bad stuff out there. Can we expect to see Calley Means testifying before a congressional committee under oath about his background, about his record, about his credentials, if the Democrats take the House majority in 2026 and have the majority in the 120th Congress?
Yes, and he'll have a lot to answer for. First, he'll have to answer for what seem to be sweeping conflicts of interest. So as you know, Steve, while he is serving as probably the most influential policymaker within Health and Human Services, and I actually put him above RFK, candidly, he also is running a business on the side called TrueMed. And what TrueMed does is it basically helps people use tax preferential dollars, so pre-tax dollars, to buy supplements and saunas and other, broad health and wellness items. And they create these letters of medical necessity that basically allow people to buy things that have no scientific basis for their efficacy. Well, what is he doing while he's in the public sector? He is changing benefits design from CMS to make it easier for his company to allow people to get letters of medical necessity and to allow people to use pre-tax dollars to buy these health and wellness supplements. So he is directly self-dealing with TrueMed. And this is a pattern that we see across the administration. There's Brad Smith, who's doing the same thing with his healthcare products and services company. Brad Smith ran healthcare for Doge for the first 100 days and hooked up his investors at Main Street Health. And RFK, of course, has a series of conflicts of interest with vaccine litigation. So they're all self-dealing. and they are putting their personal profit ahead of public health. Because functionally, their aim is to turn our healthcare system into one giant GNC store, where you go out there, you have no idea what works and what doesn't. Snake oil salesmen are constantly peddling things, and there isn't a basis of scientific utility behind things that the average consumer can buy with their HSAs or under insurance. Now, we have to push back on that. People deserve to know if what they're putting into their bodies is safe and effective, as confirmed by randomized, double-blind trials surveyed by the Food and Drug Administration.
It's an extraordinary moment here in these United States in 2025. I think we're going to have a very difficult summer in this country. It hasn't begun yet. We're still a week or so away. But Donald Trump has announced himself with clear intention. And I think the American people are not going to enjoy his enforcement plans. And we'll see what public opinion does and how it reacts to all of this in the short, medium, and long term here over the remaining 500 days.
Public pressure matters here. And this is the biggest. I met with my constituents over a big Zoom town hall 3 days ago. My biggest message to them was, don't give in to the sense of nihilism or apathy that he wants you to feel. Their muzzle velocity flood the zone strategy was designed to disorient and demoralize. And if you actually look at authoritarian playbooks from democratic backsliding in Latin America or Europe, what you see is that would-be strongmen are constantly probing and testing. The media, the judges, the military, the election system. What can I do? What can I get away with? And when they get away with something, they get stronger. They expand their avert window of authoritarianism. And when they don't, when they touch that stove and they get burned, they deplete their political capital. They get less credible to their own, not so much their own hardcore supporters who are on, with them regardless, but to those people who are on the fence, right? Those people who want to see where the wind is blowing, who end up making up the decisive vote. And so it does matter. It matters that Garcia is brought back from El Salvador, even if they charge him with crimes. Charging him with crimes under due process is totally legitimate if he was violating the law. It matters that he got brought back. It matters, right, that in my district, we get this 18-year-old who is detained on the way to volleyball practice, an honors student, that we get him released from detention. Because every time they touch a stove and it's hot and they pull back, the political capital is depleted and the authoritarian playbook for them works less well. And this deployment of Marines to LA and the threat to deploy them to Chicago or New York or Washington, D.C., this needs to be met with solidarity and public pressure. And it's on us as Democrats to not make this about everything, right? To not tell people that you can't be with us against his abuse of posse comitatus or due process if you don't agree with us about this, that, or the other issue. We have to create, one long pole in the sand of we oppose an authoritarian, and we welcome everybody to oppose him with us, even if you disagree with us about how you might govern going forward. That's okay. We need you here with us right now.
I just want to thank you very much for your time. One thing that I want to say to everybody is that as you hear this, is that you can follow the Congressman on Substack. Simple, but not easy. It is a great Substack, and there's a lot of great ideas that are going to become important for the recovery, the renewal of the Democratic Party in our two-party system. We need a healthier Democratic Party, and we need it yesterday to be able to have the credibility to make the arguments that need to be made that the American people need to hear. Very easy to be cynical about politics in this moment, but when you see Jake Auchincloss and you follow him, it's going to help you raise up your idealism. Because there is still the best and the brightest out there that are serving in positions of responsibility and prove that public service is a noble thing, right? That being a congressman can be a noble undertaking. And we have people like Jake Auchincloss in the Congress that are clearly, directly, and absolutely on your side. And so support them, follow them, and listen to them because it's going to take real leaders with new ideas to help get this country out of the mess that it has found itself in after a long season of wishing the problems that were building up away. Well, they're here. They are clear. And we're going to have to offer something better in order to get out of this. And Jake Auchincloss is one of the guys who is on the better side of that equation. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. My pleasure. I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning. I invite you to join this community where I promise to be honest, blunt, and direct about what is happening in this country. America is in crisis. Follow and subscribe to this channel and on Substack. Thank you.